Welcome back to the All Sorts podcast.
Yes, welcome back.
Your sonic sanctuary, really,
That's a good way to put it.
where we embark on these deep dives, right, into these fascinating currents of knowledge.
I like that, currents of knowledge. It's very poetic.
So think of us as like your expert guides.
Kind of like, Sherpas.
Yeah. Ready to navigate this huge stack of information for you.
Distill it down to the essentials.
Yeah, the intriguing stuff, the aha moments.
Give the listeners those little brain sparks.
Yeah, those brain sparks, so that you can broaden your understanding of the world around you, right?
Exactly.
So today, we're setting our sights on a substance
Mhm.
with a long and complex history.
Definitely complex.
Nicotine.
Nicotine, that's right. So for this deep dive, we've gone deep.
Very deep.
Wikipedia, broad scientific landscapes.
Always a good starting point, right?
Yeah. And then we went into more focused research.
Like,
Springer Link, PMC, that sort of thing.
mhm.
All to bring you a comprehensive, yet digestible
Digestible, yeah.
understanding of nicotine.
So our mission, as always, is to equip you, our listeners, with the insights that matter.
The need to know stuff.
The need to know, yeah.
And stuff that'll make you sound smart at parties.
At those cocktail parties, yeah. So we're going to unpack the uses of nicotine,
All the different things it's used for.
explore its effects on your body,
How it makes you feel, basically.
delve into the intricacies of its pharmacology.
Ooh, big word.
That's how it actually works.
The nitty-gritty.
Yeah, the nitty-gritty, and navigate the ever-shifting terrain.
Always changing, always
Yeah.
moving.
Yeah, of its legal status.
Very relevant these days.
So get ready to separate the myths from realities
Fact from fiction,
and gain a richer perspective on this
surprisingly.
multifaceted compound.
Multifaceted is a good word for it.
Very good word. Okay, so let's jump right in.
Let's dive in.
How's nicotine used?
Well, you probably associate it most strongly with smoking cessation,
Okay.
kicking the habit.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this.
That's it.
So we see all these familiar aids.
Right.
The gums, the patches, the sprays.
Inhalers even.
All designed to be kind of like stepping stones, right? Away from cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
And they do this by easing the discomfort of withdrawal.
Make it a little less painful to quit
Right. And it seems like using nicotine in this way,
in this very specific way.
yeah, actually has a pretty solid track record for safety, right?
Yep, absolutely. The research shows good safety profile for nicotine replacement therapy.
Okay.
When used as directed, of course.
Of course, always as directed.
Always with a doctor's supervision.
Right. So what's interesting to consider, though, is that these slower release methods,
Yeah, like the patches in the gum.
so they're delivering the nicotine more steadily, right?
Mm-mm.
Can actually be maybe even less likely to lead to dependence.
Yeah, compared to smoking, which gives you those rapid spikes.
Right.
It's all about smoothing out those peaks and valleys.
That makes intuitive sense.
Avoid those intense, ups and downs that kind of drive that addictive behavior.
Right. Now, something that you might not immediately connect with nicotine,
Yeah, this one might surprise you.
its use as a pesticide.
That's right.
Good pesticide.
Nicotine. It's a naturally occurring alkaloid.
Okay.
Think of it like a naturally produced chemical
Okay.
with potent effects.
Like caffeine, for instance.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's found in the nightshade family.
Okay.
Tobacco being the most well-known.
Mm-hmm. So historically, it was employed to keep those pests at bay.
In agriculture.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating how a substance with such a profound effect on the human nervous system
Yeah.
can also disrupt the biology of insects.
Right. Right. So if I'm out in my garden, I'm trying to, grow some stuff organically.
Right?
Can I still use nicotine as a pesticide?
Well, not in the U.S.,
Okay.
at least. Its legal status in organic crop production is currently as a prohibited non-synthetic substance.
So it's natural, but it's not allowed.
Exactly.
Interesting how times change. All right, so let's move to a potentially surprising application of nicotine,
All right, this is a fun one.
performance enhancement.
Performance enhancement, yeah.
I actually came across a meta-analysis
Ooh, fancy.
suggesting that nicotine can have short-term positive effects.
Short-term being the key word there.
Okay, yeah, short-term positive effects on things like motor skills, attention,
Even memory.
even memory.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's fascinating here is the research into what's called cholinergic enhancement.
Okay.
So nicotine acts on specific receptors in the brain called nicotinic acetylcholine receptors.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is a bit of a tongue twister. Think of them as keyholes on your brain cells.
Okay.
that are crucial for all sorts of cognitive processes.
Right, right.
So by interacting with these keyholes, nicotine can temporarily boost these functions.
So theoretically, you could slap on a nicotine patch
Hypothetically.
before you tackle some complex task.
Maybe writing a podcast script.
Right, and get that mental edge.
Well, the meta-analysis does point to those short-term gains.
Yeah.
But it's really important to weigh that against the potential long-term costs.
Yeah.
Primarily the risk of addiction, other adverse effects that we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
So think of it like a short-term loan for your brain power
Okay.
with potentially hefty long-term interest.
Yeah. Not a good deal in the long run. And of course, we can't overlook the most prevalent way that nicotine is used, right?
Oh, yeah.
Recreationally.
Recreationally.
Mostly through tobacco in its various forms.
Cigarettes, cigars, chewing tobacco, snuff.
Where it acts as both a stimulant, giving you that buzz,
Wakes you up, gets you going.
but then surprisingly, also something that can reduce anxiety.
For some users.
Okay, so that dual action is really at the heart of its widespread appeal.
Yeah, it's a powerful combination. You get that stimulant effect, that kick,
Mm-hmm.
and then for some people, those anxiolytic properties
Okay.
create this temporary sense of calm.
Right, so it's like a push and pull.
It's a complex relationship for sure.
Okay, so we've seen all these ways that nicotine is used. Now, who should be really cautious?
Yeah, who should maybe avoid it altogether?
Right, so our sources didn't really have a specific section on contraindications.
Right, no hard and fast rules.
But I'm guessing there are some obvious groups.
Yeah, I mean, based on the risks that we'll be discussing,
Okay.
particularly around pregnancy, cardiovascular health,
Right.
and that significant potential for addiction,
Mm-hmm.
it's clear that certain populations should exercise extreme caution
Yeah.
or avoid nicotine entirely,
Right, so common sense prevails,
as always.
as always. Okay, so let's delve into those adverse effects.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Starting with something that many of us cherish.
Ooh, what's that?
Sleep.
Sleep.
Seems like nicotine can really disrupt our ability to get a good night's rest.
Oh, absolutely. Whether you're actively using nicotine, going through withdrawal, or even using nicotine replacement therapy,
Oh, wow.
sleep disturbances are a common issue.
I see.
And those stimulant properties,
Mm-hmm.
they can definitely interfere with both falling asleep
Yeah.
and staying asleep.
So not surprising for a stimulant.
No, not at all. It's kind of what they do.
Right. Now, let's talk about the cardiovascular system.
Heart and blood vessels.
Yeah, this seems like a significant area of concern.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah.
In the short term, nicotine causes a transient increase in blood pressure.
Transient meaning.
Temporary. It goes
Okay.
up for a bit, then comes back down.
I see.
But if we look at the bigger picture, long-term studies, there's a correlation between nicotine use and increased risk of sustained high blood pressure.
Okay, so that's hypertension.
Exactly, hypertension.
Right. And what about things like heart palpitations or chest pains? Mm-hmm. I remember seeing something about that in the context of nicotine replacement therapy.
Yeah, so some research on NRT
Okay.
did show rare instances of chest pains and heart palpitations.
So it's not completely risk-free.
No, not entirely.
No.
And a broader analysis, a network meta-analysis actually,
Okay.
suggested that there might be a slightly elevated risk of cardiovascular events with NRT,
Okay.
although it's important to note that serious cardiac events
Okay.
weren't statistically significant in that analysis.
Okay.
So it's something to be aware of, but it seems like those events are infrequent.
All right. Good to know. So let's tackle the big one. Addiction.
The elephant in the room.
Yeah, we all know nicotine is highly addictive.
That's not really a secret.
But what's going on in the brain that makes it so addictive?
Well, the primary culprit is its effect on the mesolimbic dopamine system.
Okay.
Think of it as your brain's reward center.
Okay.
So nicotine binds to those nicotinic acetylcholine receptors we mentioned before,
Oh.
and that triggers the release of dopamine.
Okay, so dopamine.
Dopamine is a neurotransmitter
Okay.
that produces those feelings of pleasure.
Okay.
It reinforces that behavior.
Right.
Makes you want to repeat it.
Okay.
And that leads to compulsive use and the high rates of relapse that we see.
So imagine your brain has a pleasure button.
I like that analogy.
Nicotine presses that button, releases dopamine, and then you want to press it again and again.
You become a pleasure button junkie.
Right. So it essentially hijacks our natural reward circuitry.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay. And I saw some mentions of tolerance and dependence.
Right?
Can you kind of break those down simply?
Sure. Nicotine dependence has several facets.
Okay.
Tolerance means that over time, you need more nicotine to achieve the same initial effects.
Right.
Sensitization is a more complex process where your response to the drug can actually increase with repeated use.
So you become more sensitive.
In a way, yeah. Physical dependence occurs when your body adapts to the presence of nicotine,
Okay.
and you experience withdrawal symptoms when you stop.
Okay. And then psychological dependence is the emotional and mental craving for nicotine?
That's right, that feeling that you needed to cope or function.
Okay.
So think of it like this.
Okay.
Tolerance is needing a stronger cup of coffee to get the same buzz.
Okay.
Physical dependence is the headache you get if you skip your morning coffee.
Right.
And psychological dependence is feeling like you need that coffee to start your day, even if you don't have a headache.
That's a great analogy. Okay, and those withdrawal symptoms sound pretty rough.
Oh, yeah?
Depression, anxiety, irritability, difficulty concentrating, sleep problems.
It's not fun.
No, it doesn't sound fun at all.
And the research shows that those symptoms typically peak within 1 to 3 days after stopping.
Okay.
But they can persist for several weeks
Oh, wow.
as your body and brain kind of readjust.
Now, this is interesting. Our sources mentioned that nicotine paradoxically shows weaker reinforcing properties
Yeah, this is a bit of a head scratcher.
in animal studies
Right.
compared to other drugs that are known for their addictive potential,
Like cocaine or heroin.
which is really surprising given how notoriously addictive it is in humans.
Yeah.
So is it purely the delivery method,
That's part of it, for sure.
or are there other factors that we're kind of missing?
Well, the rapid delivery and sensory experience associated with smoking, for example,
Okay.
those contribute a lot to its addictiveness in humans.
I see.
And then there's research suggesting that other compounds present in tobacco smoke,
Like what?
things like monoamine oxidase inhibitors,
Okay.
acetaldehyde,
Mm-hmm.
those may actually enhance nicotine's addictive properties beyond what nicotine does on its own.
So it's not just the nicotine acting in isolation in a cigarette.
Exactly. It's a complex cocktail of chemicals.
Right. And I remember reading about phosphine, which sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Phosphine, yeah, it's a mouthful. What's fascinating here is that this protein accumulates in a specific area of the brain
Where?
known as the nucleus accumbens.
Nucleus
It's
accumbens.
part of the reward system.
Okay.
And this protein, it acts like a long-lasting molecular switch,
Okay.
contributes to those persistent changes in the brain associated with addiction.
So even after someone stops using nicotine, the phosphine levels can remain elevated
That's right.
for a considerable time.
And that potentially contributes to the risk of relapse.
Oh, wow.
So it's like it leaves this lasting footprint
Yeah.
in the brain's reward system.
Okay. So moving on to another major concern, cancer.
The big C.
Yeah, there's a lot of public confusion about nicotine and cancer.
Oh, absolutely.
So what does the current scientific consensus tell us?
Well, according to leading authorities like the International Agency for Research on Cancer
Okay.
and the Surgeon General of the United States, nicotine itself is generally not considered a carcinogen,
Carcinogen meaning
something that directly causes cancer.
in healthy cells.
Right.
Right.
So the evidence available right now isn't enough to definitively conclude that nicotine actually initiates cancer development in humans.
That's a really important distinction that often gets lost.
Yeah, people tend to lump everything together.
Right. But I also understand that nicotine isn't entirely innocent when it comes to cancer.
Right, it's not completely off the hook.
Okay.
So while it might not be the initial spark that ignites cancer, nicotine can act like fertilizer for existing cancer cells.
Interesting.
It can promote their growth and the process of metastasis,
Metastasis meaning.
the spread of cancer to other parts of the body.
Okay.
It does this by stimulating various processes within those cancer cells,
Okay.
like accelerating their growth cycle,
Okay.
helping them transition to a more mobile state,
Okay.
promoting their ability to invade tissues and form new blood vessels.
New blood vessels. Okay.
That's called angiogenesis,
Okay.
to feed the tumor,
Mm-hmm.
and even helping them evade programmed cell death.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's pretty insidious.
Mm.
And these effects are primarily mediated through those nicotinic acetylcholine receptors we talked about,
Right.
particularly a subtype called ADO7,
Okay.
and also to some extent through adrenergic receptors.
So the key takeaway here isn't that nicotine causes cancer,
Right, not like the tar and other compounds in smoke.
but it can act as a fertilizer for existing cancer cells,
Exactly.
making it dangerous in a different way.
It's dangerous, just not in the way people typically think.
Right. So while it's not the arsonist,
Hmm,
it can definitely fuel the fire.
that's a good way to put it.
What about genotoxicity?
Genotoxicity.
Yeah, damage to our DNA.
Ah, right. Well, some laboratory studies
Okay.
conducted in vitro,
In vitro meaning.
meaning in cells outside of a living organism,
Okay.
have suggested that certain compounds derived from nicotine
Okay.
might cause DNA damage.
In human cells.
Yeah, in human cells. But the overall significance of these findings in living organisms
Okay.
and their direct link to cancer development in humans, that's still an active area of research.
Okay, so more research needed.
Always more research needed.
Okay. And finally, in terms of adverse effects, pregnancy, and breastfeeding.
Yeah, this is a big one.
This sounds like an absolute red flag for nicotine use.
Definitely a red flag.
Yeah.
Nicotine has been shown to cause birth defects,
Okay.
and it's considered a teratogen,
A teratogen.
a substance that can harm a developing fetus.
Okay.
So the scientific consensus is that there is no safe level of nicotine exposure during pregnancy.
Wow.
And animal studies have raised concerns that nicotine exposure during adolescence could negatively impact cognitive development.
Adolescence.
Yeah, the teenage years.
Okay.
But the direct relevance of these findings to human brain development,
Okay.
that's still being investigated.
Okay, so more to learn.
Always more to learn.
Okay, so that was a sobering overview
Yeah, a lot to think about.
of the potential downsides. Let's move on to the topic of overdose.
Overdose.
How toxic is nicotine?
Well, the estimated lower fatal dose for adults
Okay.
through ingestion is quite high,
Okay.
somewhere between 500 to 1,000 milligrams.
Okay.
And high doses can lead to what's known as nicotine poisoning,
Okay.
which can cause severe symptoms:
Like what?
nausea, vomiting, seizures, even coma,
Wow.
and potentially lead to organ failure and death,
Okay.
primarily through paralysis of the muscles involved in breathing.
Okay.
But it's important to note that serious or fatal overdoses from typical nicotine use are relatively rare.
But I do recall reading about cases of poisoning from specific plants and potential risks to young children.
Yeah, you have to be careful with certain plants.
Mm.
There have been documented cases of nicotine poisoning from ingesting plants like Nicotiana glauca.
Nicotiana glauca.
Yeah, it's also known as tree tobacco.
Okay.
Contains high levels of nicotine. And there's also a significant risk of toxicity for children
Yeah.
who might accidentally ingest cigarettes, e-cigarette liquids, nicotine gum.
Right.
Their lower body weight makes them more susceptible to nicotine's effects.
So keep those products well out of reach of children.
Absolutely vital.
Okay. Now let's briefly touch on drug interactions.
Drug interactions.
Does nicotine interfere with other medications people might be taking?
Well, our sources did mention that pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetic interactions are possible.
Okay, so pharmacodynamic interactions.
That's where nicotine affects how other drugs exert their effects in the body.
I see.
And pharmacokinetic interactions involve nicotine influencing how the body processes other drugs.
So absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion.
All that good stuff.
Right, right.
But the specific examples of these interactions, they weren't really detailed in the excerpts we reviewed.
Okay, so bottom line is, because nicotine can potentially alter how your body handles other medications, anyone using nicotine products, taking other drugs, should definitely talk to their doctor.
Absolutely. Have that conversation with your healthcare provider.
Okay, let's delve a bit deeper into the pharmacology now.
Pharmacology, here we go.
How nicotine actually works in the body.
The nuts and bolts.
Right. So we touched on pharmacodynamics earlier. Its effects on receptors. Seems like it has a pretty specific target.
Yeah, its primary action is as a receptor agonist.
Agonist.
It activates the receptor
Okay.
at most nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, or NARs for short. Think of it like a key that fits into these specific locks on your cells.
Okay.
But it's interesting to note that at two particular subtypes of these receptors,
Okay.
alanine and alanine,
Okay.
nicotine actually acts as an antagonist,
Meaning.
meaning it blocks the receptor.
Okay.
It binds to the lock, but it doesn't open it,
I see.
effectively blocking the action of other substances. And this blocking action is actually thought to contribute to the mild pain-relieving effects that some users experience.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's a bit of a double agent.
And in the central nervous system, it sounds like it has a pretty widespread influence.
Oh, absolutely. It affects the release of numerous neurotransmitters.
So it's kind of like a volume control for brain activity?
That's a good analogy. And interestingly, it has a higher affinity for these brain receptors.
Okay.
Compared to the ones found in skeletal muscles.
Right.
Which is why its psychoactive effects are more pronounced than its muscle-related effects at typical doses.
Okay.
But at very high toxic doses, it can cause muscle issues, including that dangerous paralysis of the respiratory muscles we mentioned before.
Right, so dose matters.
Dose always matters.
You also mentioned Nesbitt's paradox.
Nesbitt's paradox.
That seemingly contradictory shift from stimulant to sedative effects.
Right.
Depending on the dose.
It's a bit weird.
That's quite a peculiar characteristic for a drug.
It is. At lower doses, it generally acts as a stimulant, increasing alertness, arousal.
Okay.
But as the dose escalates, it can actually dampen neuronal activity.
Okay.
Leading to those sedative-like effects.
So it's like a U-shaped curve?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
And this complex profile likely contributes to the varied subjective experiences reported by nicotine users.
Some people feel energized, others feel relaxed.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
And research also suggests that cotinine, which is the primary metabolite of nicotine in the body,
Cocaine, okay.
might also play a role in mediating some of those psychoactive effects.
Our sources didn't really go into much detail about the sympathetic nervous system or the adrenal medulla, but I know those are often key players in the body's response to stimulants.
They are. While not extensively covered in the excerpts we examined,
Okay.
nicotine's interactions with the sympathetic nervous system and the adrenal medulla are definitely part of its broader physiological effects, contributing to things like increases in heart rate and blood pressure.
Right. So, moving on to pharmacokinetics.
Pharmacokinetics, how the body handles the drug.
How the body handles nicotine after it's introduced.
Absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion.
And the main metabolite we encountered was cotinine.
Cotinine, that's the one. And its levels in the body are often used as a biomarker to assess exposure to nicotine.
So whether it's from direct use or secondhand smoke.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift gears to the chemistry of nicotine itself.
Chemistry time.
It's interesting that synthetic nicotine has been around for a while.
For decades, actually.
And it only recently became more commercially viable.
Yeah, the economics have changed.
So for many years, extracting nicotine directly from tobacco plants.
That was the cheapest way to go.
But with the rapid growth of the e-cigarette market.
And those oral pouches.
And the oral pouches.
Especially the ones marketed as tobacco-free.
Right.
Synthetic nicotine production has scaled up. Costs have come down.
And this initially created kind of a regulatory loophole in the U.S.
A bit of a gray area.
Because the FDA's authority was primarily tied to nicotine derived from tobacco.
That's right.
So to address this, Congress passed an amendment as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act in 2022.
To close that loophole.
Which expanded the FDA's regulatory authority to include nicotine from any source.
So synthetic nicotine is now firmly under their purview.
So now all nicotine-containing products fall under the same regulatory umbrella.
One umbrella for all.
What about how nicotine is actually made in plants?
Biosynthesis.
It's not just magically there.
No, it's a pretty intricate process.
Okay.
So it's naturally synthesized in the roots of nightshade plants.
Okay.
With tobacco and Duoisia hopwoodi being the primary commercial sources.
Okay, and the fundamental building blocks for this process,
the precursors,
are relatively simple organic compounds called ornithine and nicotinic acid.
That's right. Simple ingredients, complex product.
And we have methods to detect nicotine in bodily fluids.
Oh yeah, we've got ways.
Which is crucial for various reasons.
Absolutely.
Research, medical diagnostics, regulatory enforcement.
All sorts of reasons.
I also noticed mention of analyzing enantiomers.
Enantiomers, those mirror image molecule.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Techniques like chiral high-performance liquid chromatography, or HPLC,
okay,
are used to separate and analyze those different enantiomers.
Okay.
And there's a method called site-specific peak intensity ratio, or SPI.
SPIR, okay.
Using nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, NMR.
Okay.
That can help differentiate between naturally derived and synthetically produced nicotine.
Wow, that's getting pretty technical.
It is, but it's becoming more and more relevant with the growth of the synthetic nicotine market.
For regulatory and forensic purposes.
Exactly.
And finally, in the realm of chemistry, there's this ongoing research.
Always research.
Into creating and studying these nicotine analogs and derivatives.
Yeah, they're tweaking the molecule.